So step 3, which is make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. I love that step. It is my favourite step because I am a control freak. And I always thought that I could change whatever as long as I went like that. I've spent my whole life doing that, hanging on, clinging on, pushing. And this let me off the hook. Step 3 completely let me off the hook of that. I'm like, I'm not in control. I can't, it doesn't matter how much I do, it's already predefined. Somebody else is in charge, I'll let them have the control. I just didn't want it anymore, I couldn't do it. I was too exhausted to try and take a hold of my life. So I was only too willing. I was quite, my sponsor was American, so he was into that whole kind of, I always think of Americans as being quite sort of ostentatious with their emotions, and so he made me do it in public in this secret garden in Regent's Park where I had to get on my knees and say it out loud, and then he had to hug me and we had to make this big thing of it, so I felt a little bit inhibited about doing it, but I did do it. But it wasn't like a thunderbolt. I know some people just go, I think I was too riddled with my shyness to allow any thunderbolts that might have happened.
I mean, you really have to put down your ego for that stuff, because it's easily, you could be embarrassed. And they say, you can't save your ass and face at the same time.
Surrendering to a higher power, which means letting go of the concept that they can control the circumstances in their life. Like I let go of the circumstances related to my controlling my lover's life and what he was going to do. Letting go of that concept is the first step towards freedom.
Well, what was happening to me and why dealing with a higher power was an issue was that I had, after numerous false starts with recovery and failures, I would say, at it, I became aware, or I became convinced that doing the steps, working with the steps, was the way to recover. I noticed that people who really stayed sober and had commendable sobriety were people who worked the steps, so to speak. I didn't even know what that meant. But so when I started that process with my sponsor, who encouraged me to do that, I realized right away I was going to have difficulty with God, because my background is extremely religious. I came from a fundamentalist religious background, and I had gone through stages where I had renounced religion completely, and was really quite angry at it. So it was just a problem. My sponsor said, he said, here's what I encourage you to do. Here's what I do. I encourage you to do this. Every night before I get into bed, I get on my knees and I thank God for keeping me, and I ask God to keep me sober through the night. And then every morning when I get up, the first thing I do is get on my knees and ask God to keep me sober throughout the day. And I said, I can't do that. I just can't do that. And I tried it, and it made me sick, because it just instantly brought me back into that whole context of church, fundamentalist church, and people, down at the mourner's bench, people thumping you on the back and praying you through confession and all that. And it just made me angry and furious. But everybody was saying it, all my sponsors and all my programs. And so I knew I had to kind of deal with this. So I started working on the steps, and I wrote about my feelings about higher power, about God and so forth. It occurred to me that if I could start my day with a yoga practice, and then I don't remember if I thought of this or I just discovered it, but the practice of getting on your knees, that's one of the first things I did in my class. There I was on my knees with my head on the floor prostrated, and suddenly I realized, oh, I can pray here. And so that became a wonderful ritual. It became my entree into my day. I think the most important thing to get across about me is that yoga, the practice of yoga, enabled me to approach higher power. without the yoga, I was stuck.
The first 3 steps are related to turning one's will over to a higher power. So if you are interested in the philosophy of yoga, if you can get to that place, some people can start with that, some people can get there after years. But if you're curious enough to read the something in the philosophy of yoga, then you'll see that one of the things that helps one to reveal one's true self to oneself, to see one's true self. One method that Patanjali, who is one of the sages of yoga, has recommended is surrender to a higher power, Ishvara Pranidhana, so that your whole being is absorbed in the experience of this higher power. That's probably the path somewhat of what we call bhakti yoga, bhakti yogis, devotional love to a higher power.